making such a big deal about whether something is hydrophobic or hydrophilic? Well, one thing I want you to take away from these lectures is that at a glance, I'm going to give you my tips on how to look at the chemical structure of a drug and make a good stab and guess as to whether it's hydrophilic or hydrophobic. So, what makes a molecule hydrophilic versus hydrophobic? Now, these aren't the only things, but these are very easy to pick out. So one thing that might make it hydrophilic versus hydrophobic, if you have polar covalent bonds. Again, polar covalent bonds, these introduce partial charges, that positive and negative charges on the molecule. Therefore, again, remember, water also has partial positive and negative charges. So if you have polar covalent bonds, then you have would make a molecule more toward the hydrophilic side. Versus nonpolar covalent bonds, if you have the same atom forming a bond, covalent bond, again, there's nothing's going to win that tug of war. Therefore, it would be more toward the hydrophobic side. No real charge, nothing for water to really grab onto. So things like hydrogen bonding sites, again, with again oxygen, nitrogen, and fluorine, these are potential hydrogen bonding sites. If you see a lot of oxygen, nitrogen, or fluorine molecules, this might make something toward the hydrophilic side. Whereas hydrophobic, if you see a lot of carbon-carbon, again, same, nonpolar covalent bonds, and carbon-hydrocarbon bonds, then this makes a molecule more towards the hydrophobic side. Okay, so it's all, when I look at a molecule, it's all about balancing out these factors. These are what I look at first. Now here we have a molecule. Now what do we notice here? Well, notice that there are a lot of oxygen molecules, right? So remember, can oxygen form hydrogen bonds? Yeah, they can form a lot of hydrogen bonding sites. Here we have oxygen, oxygen, oxygen. And we also have a lot of oxygen linked to hydrogen. So we have a lot of polar covalent bonds and potential hydrogen binding sites. And we have a lot of polar covalent bonds between the oxygens and hydrogen. And nonpolar covalent bonds, we do have some carbon-carbon and hydrocarbon bonds, but again, what we have here are a lot of oxygen atoms, so this is probably hydrophilic. Now, this is actually vitamin C or ascorbic acid. So it makes sense that it is hydrophilic because, again, if it wasn't hydrophilic, then citrus fruits, instead of having a lot of vitamin C in it, it would probably be like suspended in oil or in the rind. Or if you had, like, if you ever looked at a lot of those, like, canned beverages or monster drinks, they have a lot of these water soluble vitamins and probably like your daily allowance of vitamin C in there. If vitamin C wasn't hydrophilic, then vitamin C wouldn't be able to be added to a lot of drinks and fortify a lot of these drinks. Or if it wasn't these drinks, it would form an oil slick. So again, vitamin C is hydrophilic. Now, next molecule. What we have here now, compared to our previous molecule with vitamin C, notice that, hey, we only have two oxygen atoms right here, right? So we don't have too many hydrogen bonding sites. The rest of it are all carbon and hydrogen atoms. So with only two oxygen atoms, there's only a few hydrogen bonding sites and not too many polar covalent bonds. So again, we do have oxygen forming polar covalent bonds, but those are the only two on the whole molecule. Now you have a lot of nonpolar covalent bonds. So what we have here is that we have a lot of carbon-carbon and hydrocarbon bonds. Again, if organic chemistry is a distant bad memory for you, even though you have all these structures here, it's not explicitly said what atoms these are. These are all carbons and their associated hydrogen atoms. So you not only have carbon-carbon and hydrocarbon bonds, you have a lot of these carbon-carbon and hydrocarbon bonds. Therefore, which way does the scale tip? It strongly tips toward the hydrophobic side. So this is a hydrophobic compound. In fact, it is tetrahydrocannabinol, THC. Now, tetrahydrocannabinol is hydrophobic. So this is why, compared to something like vitamin C or drugs that are water soluble, those are easily filtered out or secreted into your urine because, again, urine is water based. But THC, does that easily get secreted out? Can you just drink a lot of water and flush your system? Thing is that because it's hydrophobic, it's also lipid soluble. So things like THC, drugs that are lipid soluble, they tend to accumulate in adipose tissue and fatty tissues of the body. And again, this is another reason why it has psychoactive effects. Since it's hydrophobic, it's actually able to pass through the lipophilic blood-brain barrier. So the blood-brain barrier is a barrier that's between the vasculature and the neural tissue of your brain. So the thing about the blood-brain barrier, it has many cells between the blood vessels and your actual brain tissue. So things like endothelial cells, parasites, and especially astrocytes, those are important in forming the blood-brain barrier. So you have all these membranes from these cells preventing every single molecule from diffusing from your blood into your brain. So it makes sense that hydrophobic drugs tend to pass easily through that blood-brain barrier because, again, you have that hydrophobic core that's blocking all the hydrophilic molecules. But hydrophobic molecules have an easier time diffusing through those layers of the plasma membranes of all those cells in that barrier. So this is why THC has an easy psychoactive effect. Or actually, this reminds me of a story. So I have a friend, and let's say he has certain recreational interests, and one of them is being a specialty baker. So we were talking, and he told me about his latest recipe, and he's trying to do urban fusion into his specialty brownies. Now, he told me that the original recipe had a lot of butter, and he doesn't really care for butter. So he just started using his herbs dry in his brownie batter, but he says like, it doesn't quite taste the same. So I'm like, okay, so you said the original recipe called for a lot of butter, and I'm like, did you know that the actual flavor compound you're looking for is soluble in fat? So that means it dissolves easier in fat. So the thing is that that's why his special baked goods taste different to him or tasted different to him because that if he by reducing the fat content, he reduces the amount of lipid soluble compounds that could be extracted from the herbs. So I told him like maybe you should try cooking the herbs in butter first and then using the butter in your brownies. And then he's like, oh, okay, I'll try that. So he told me, it's like, oh wow, the next batch of brownies tastes excellent. And I'm like, there you go. This is a little chemistry. How you cook with better chemistry.